Okay, here we go. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the settlement chart that you guys did. So I'm not going to go through every single box on here, but I am going to talk about a few of the things that I think are really important here. So first, let's look at the French and the Dutch here. You kind of compare these as you go along, and you see a lot of similarities. For example, you see they established trading posts, both the French and the Dutch. They both came for economic reasons, particularly with fur trade. And then when we look on the backside, you can see that their interaction with the natives was pretty peaceful, mostly like a trading relationship, although the French did also intermarry. You don't see a lot of converting of natives to Christianity or anything like that. It's a much more peaceful relationship than with, say, the English and the Spanish. Okay, let's go back to the front side. I'm going to go through the Spanish here a little bit. We talked about them a little bit in class, but you can kind of see where they settled, the places that they were settling. They settled with conquistadors, the military, the missionaries, all single men, which kind of results in that intermarriage and the creation of the mestizo class, as we talked about before. In terms of their motivation for colonizing, he has God, gold, and glory. You can kind of see at the bottom there. And so they're looking for converting natives. They're looking for wealth with the gold and glory, the kind of power for Spain, that nationalism that we talked about before. Okay, on the backside here, when it comes to religion, they had very little tolerance for any other religions, native religions or any other kind. And they were forcing the conversion of natives, which kind of goes along with the encomienda system like we talked about. So in terms of a labor system here, the encomienda system is their main labor system, at least in the beginning. It enslaved the natives. However, once diseases and all other things kind of took their toll, they kind of transitioned to African slavery later on, particularly in the Caribbean and South America. Okay, let's go back to the front here and look at the English here. Now, the English are settled in two places, the Chesapeake and New England. So the Chesapeake is going to be kind of Virginia, and the New England's going to be Massachusetts. The Chesapeake is in the south, New England's in the north. So kind of keep that distinction in mind. Make sure you're aware of what the difference is between those two places. They're settled not too far apart. The Chesapeake region got settled a little bit before that. And this is primarily for economic reasons that they settle, particularly the growth of tobacco, which they discovered with help from the Native Americans. John Rolfe is the Englishman who first just figures out how to grow tobacco. Maryland, which is another colony that is in the Chesapeake region, was established as a Catholic kind of safety place, where Catholics were persecuted in England, and they've had a safe haven into Maryland. That's why they passed the Act of Toleration, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So you have the Virginia Company, which sets up the first colony at Jamestown, and they kind of have farms and agriculture. They also have a kind of a pretty strict governors. You have Lord De La Warr in the beginning, who's very strict. Then later on, you develop the kind of representative assembly of the House of Burgesses, which kind of becomes a model for today's Congress. If you go in the back here, the Chesapeake, here's the Act of Toleration. I mentioned that specifically in Maryland, it protected the Catholic minority. It allowed freedom of religion as long as you were Christian. If you were Jewish or anything else, that was not okay. But as long as you were Christian of some kind, you were free to practice your religion how you wished. And this was to protect the Catholic minority in Maryland. In terms of interaction with natives, a lot of conflict over land. Early on, you had some cooperation about growing tobacco and stuff, but mostly conflict about as the English expanded east, moving inland, they were in conflict with the natives. In terms of how land was distributed in the Chesapeake region, you have, because it's agriculture, this headright system benefited the wealthy people that were there first. You basically got 50 acres of land, I think it is, for every person that you paid for to come over to settle there. So it was to your benefit to use your money to pay for people to come over because you would get more land that way. What eventually happens, however, is Bacon's Rebellion, when these indentured servants, after their time is up, serving, they would be looking for some land, and all the best land was already taken by these wealthy elites along the coast. So they felt a little bit cheated and treated unfairly by the Virginia government. So they have this rebellion, and that results in African slavery after Bacon's rebellion, because they realize that the elites don't want indentured servants because they're white and they kind of look like them, and they don't want them competing for land. African slavery allows them to stop that competition. All right, so let's take a look at the New England side of things in Massachusetts in the north. So these are different from Chesapeake in terms of it's not single men and farms, it's families who are creating these small towns. So it's not really agricultural based. In terms of government, it's a theocracy in Massachusetts in particular, so it's religious kind of oriented government. And then you have the Mayflower Compact in Plymouth that established kind of the first civil government in America. And the reason their motivation is not economic is to escape religious persecution back in England by the monarchy in England. I flip over to the back. Let's take a look at New England here. So religion in the colonies, there's no toleration in the first colonies, Massachusetts and Connecticut, Puritans only. Rhode Island is established later by Roger Williams, who was exiled from Massachusetts, and he allows freedom of religion and wants the separation of church and state so that people could practice their religion freely and also keep the church pure from corruption in government. Much like the Chesapeake region, there's conflict over land. King Philip's War is the key one here. This is the last major war with the natives. And once the English win this war, they effectively end all native resistance in the region. In terms of the land, they got permission from the king. It's kind of like a royal colony. And the labor system, there's no really indentured servants because it's not agriculture, and there's no slavery either because they just have no use for it. The soil isn't that great. Instead, it's just kind of family businesses. These are tight-knit communities where everybody knows each other and they get along and they're related. And so it's all these family businesses, not any kind of forced labor. So when you look at this chart, what I want you to think about is how do the English compare to the Spanish and the French and the Dutch? In particular, think about religion. Think about your interaction with the natives. So you see conflict between the English and the natives and the Spanish and the natives, more friendly with the French and the Dutch. So kind of keep those in mind. Look also at the labor system. See, we have forced labor with the English and the Chesapeake. We have forced labor with the Spanish, but not so much with the French and Dutch or in New England. So kind of compare these things. If we look back at the front side here, you can also compare in terms of motivation. We see economic motivations. We see economic motivations in the French and the Dutch and in the Chesapeake. You have escaping religious persecution in England, so religious freedom. But then you also have the conversion of natives. So those are all kind of different from each other. I guess the three most similar would be the Chesapeake, the French, and the Dutch. But these are different. Even though they're converting natives, the English in New England weren't really trying to convert the natives. They were just looking for a place to practice religion on their own. All right, so hopefully you have a pretty better understanding of how all these different things kind of work together and how they're similar and different to each other. And feel free to take some time to look back at these and kind of fill in your settlement chart, anything you might have missed. Okay, and then we'll talk more about these later. See you next time.